The comedian Joe Lycett has come out in praise of cancel culture because apparently it is making comedy more inclusive, more refined, more thoughtful. Let's have a look at this clip.
What is cancel culture's impact on comedy? I think that people are more thoughtful about what they write jokes about, and I think that's a good thing. I think really it's made it a better industry and a more inclusive and interesting industry.
Charlie, isn't this a bit easy for Joe Lycett to say? I mean, if you tell jokes about, I don't know, cheese or something, then you're not going to get cancelled anytime soon.
I think it's remarkable that he's made that despite the fact that he has made jokes about cheese and has still been put on the pedestal for public and indeed police opprobrium. I mean, in 2022, Joe Lycett put on a gig in Belfast and someone reported him for having an offensive joke about a donkey, of all things. I think that's on the same tier as cheese, as not being a particularly controversial area of comedy. And
I think it's late enough in the podcast that we can say this, but it's donkey dick, wasn't it? I think that was
right.
Specific.
Well, there we go.
Yeah,
you did swear earlier, so we'll rock that.
No, exactly. Yeah. There's rules to this.
Yeah.
No Ofcom here, Charlie.
Yeah, no, liberated.
Not that ever stops you.
Oh, come on now. Well, the police service in Northern Ireland turned up, they investigated, they interviewed him, and they said they had to do it. And it seems remarkable.
Is that not one of his fake stories that he implanted? That's always what I've got in the back of my mind.
Well, he actually, in that, I watched the whole thing as preparation for this podcast. And he says that he adds a bit more context, again, how much of this is also a prank, but he claims that he'd superimposed a picture of a donkey's penis over a picture of him as a child.
Right.
So maybe that would raise it to that extra level of ick that led someone to make a complaint, but who knows if it's true.
A joke's a joke. Still, the fact of the matter is he faced a police investigation insofar as he was questioned, as is claimed, at the time. And to go through that process and say that cancel culture isn't so much of an issue, I think you have to really reflect quite intensely on what could have happened to you in that situation. And I think people talk all the time about how cancel culture isn't about the force of the state. The real concern is how it's those societal impulses that lead comics and writers and thinkers to second guess. And that's certainly a massive part of it. And Simon Evans has written about this for Spike this week. But I think also we really shouldn't ignore the extent to which the state can cause that second guessing as well.
Yeah.
He's faced it himself. And I think when he's making these arguments, he should acknowledge that.
Maybe if it was a trans woman's donkey dick, then he would be behind bars, but who knows?
It wasn't in Scotland.
It wasn't in Scotland. Tom, I mean, there have been, some very brutal cancellations in comedy. This is not a non-issue.
No, I was reminded of this because Daniel O'Reilly, aka Dapper Laughs, people might remember him, about just under 10 years ago. He actually put out a response to this particular clip, but it's something we covered at the time. That was a really good example because this was a really brutal cancellation, so people can read and relitigate all of it. But he basically got cancelled for making a joke on stage that he hadn't actually made. Yeah. So he was this sort of lad character, this kind of lad comedian. He had a BBC Three TV show. ITV2, sorry.
Oi, oi.
Fraser's president of the fan club. Yeah. Tried and failed to be a contestant. But he had this show where in character teach men how to get women or whatever. And there was this kind of low level campaign to say he was disgusting and like something needs to be done about him. And then he was on stage and then he was talking about how the media had slurred him as this pro-rape comedian, and someone shouted out basically made a kind of rape joke from the audience, essentially. He repeated it after hearing it, and then he got cancelled for making this supposed rape joke. So it wasn't even anything that he'd said himself. Brutally cancelled. He lost his show. He had venues being pulled for his tour and so on. He ends up having to make this bizarre... he feels inclined to make this bizarre apology on Newsnight to Emily Maitlis.
People will remember his roll neck.
No, exactly. Like really put through the ringer, especially because people... took offence not just to what he had said because he hadn't actually said it, but also because of the fact that people saw him as this working class comedian with a working class audience, and therefore they can't stand this kind of blue material. They'll go out and act on it. They'll be overly exercised by it, and that's a big problem. So there have been so many cases of this. I mean, in recent times, Jerry Sadowitz being cancelled at the Edinburgh Fringe, a slightly more worthy example. And also, this is the point that Simon Evans makes in his piece, is that sometimes you're missing a trick by focusing too much on the ones that make the news, because obviously the bigger problem is further down the food chain, people who are doing open mics, people who are just starting out, who are quite clearly under the cosh. If they stray out of what are supposedly the safe parameters, they're going to be punished for it. And that's the unseen cost of cancel culture. But I think it just comes down to that thing that it's always the case that the people who say cancel culture don't exist, or that free speech isn't really under threat, it's always people in politics or people in culture or people in comedy who have never said anything interesting or challenging or in some cases funny in their life. That's largely why they don't feel touched by it, is because of the fact that they will never really be a target of it, the odd visit from the police over some strange donkey situation notwithstanding. But that's what it comes down to. They know that they're not the targets of it, therefore they can deny it till the cows come home.
Definitely. Charlie, final thoughts?
People can get away with it now because technology permits comedians to have alternate ways of being offensive and still making money. There is no shortage of comics who've made it online through social media who have not gone through the mainstream route anymore, partly because it doesn't really exist as much, and now make their living by maybe fishing a little bit with, here's a clip I'll put out online, and then if you want to see the real stuff, here's £5 a month. I'm paying £5 a month for a lot of good comics who can't put out stuff publicly. And
It's
all
like Roy Chubby Brown and Jim Davis and that kind of thing.
all the good stuff.
He was telling me about this before the show. I don't want to out you there, but no.
All those chalky jokes.
I knew I'd get cooked between you two. I knew it was going to be bleak, this one. But you have to. I mean, so many comedians who I think aren't bothering to go there on this argument, aren't wanting to fight back on the Joe Lycetts of this world, because they don't really need to. They don't really need to be risky in public anymore, because they can sort of advertise that there might be slightly stronger wares behind the paywall.
Yeah.
And you can get around this cancel culture because Lycett and his mob aren't going to see it. I mean, case in point, recently, there's a guy, you might watch him occasionally, Finn versus the Internet, Finn Taylor. Have you seen his?
Yeah.
Very funny. He had, on his Patreon, on the full episode, someone from that extremely strange sort of like Irish activist website, Politics Joe, as one of the guests. And this guest laughed at a really funny joke about Joe, who's the best Joe, and one of the Joes was Joseph Fritzl. It was pretty funny. I'm not going to let it got me. It tickled me. And he laughed, and because it went out on their main public section, he then was the target of no shortage of those. That's actually really offensive. That's actually so bad. How could you laugh at that? Tweets from his own team, as is the way. But since then, I've noticed that way more of Finn's divine content has been limited to the paywall only.
Yeah.
Because they've realised we can still get away with it. People can see what's good, and they'll come paying.
The fans don't mind. It's I think Simon Evans puts it really well in his article. It's like that sort of the imaginary third party that you kind of have to think about and second guess about all the time.
The comic consents, I consent, but does that angry stranger woman on Twitter consent to this joke? No, you're going to get absolutely pilloried. Why bother?